reading capital of the world. Today, we are speaking with Mr. Suneel Gupta, author of Backable. Honestly, one of the most impressive books for anyone in an entrepreneurial venture. I found beauty in its simplicity. So Suneel, I've known him for 10 years. He was a former SVP of product at Groupon, led products at Mozilla. He was most recently the co-founder and CEO of Rise, which was acquired by One Medical Group. And he's also an adjunct professor at Harvard University. Suneel, it is just such an honor to have you on the program. Welcome to 99 Pages, sir.
Rajiv, 99 Pages. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Sir, I've known you for 10 years. I've seen you go from political insider, startup phenom, Harvard professor, author. Let's just start off with the common themes of your diverse life narrative. What are the common themes that tie all this together?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. I mean, I think the simplest answer to that is storytelling. I love to tell. I love to collect and tell good stories. Nothing makes me happier than when I get to hear someone's story and it inspires and touches me, and then I get to pass that along. That's a gift. That's a total gift. And I think the other, man, is just transformation. Like the type of story that I feel most attracted to is transformation. 2004. I'm backstage at the Democratic National Convention. I'm this junior level writer at the convention. And so I'm just helping, basically pull little edits to speeches together. And, it's the Democratic National Convention. And so it's all the sort of classic names that you would expect. The Clintons are there, the Bidens are there, the Lieberman of the world are there at that time. And all of a sudden I see this guy who's the keynote speaker, and I realized that I don't recognize who he is. And so I asked the backstage manager, like, who is that guy? And the backstage manager literally looks at his clipboard and he's like, I don't know. He's a guy, all I know is he's a state senator from Illinois. And it was later on that night that while Barack Obama introduces himself to the world, I got to sort of see this backstage view of the world being introduced to him. And it was this amazing moment because I think I became one of millions of people in that moment, in that speech that sort of became, infatuated with Barack Obama. But again, back to storytelling, I wanted to understand where that story really began. And so I started talking to everybody that I could on his team, in the Chicago area, on like, where did this all start? And what I found really surprised me, man, really surprised me. And you probably already know the story, Rajiv, but just in case anybody's watching who doesn't, because I feel it bears worth repeating. In 2000, 4 years before that speech, Barack Obama ran for Congress, not for Senate, not for president, he ran for Congress, and he lost. And he lost big. He lost by a 2-to-1 margin. A lot of people don't remember that, but the thing that was most surprising to me is that if you would have seen the way that he was spoken about during that campaign, the way that he was reviewed during that campaign, it would blow your mind. He was described as stilted, as boring, as professorial. There was a journalist named Ted McClellan who followed his campaign around, and he said Barack Obama is so dry that he sucks the air right out of the room. Those were his lines. And 4 years later, he is this bastion of hope and energy and inspiration. And it just made me realize, I mean, I'm just starting my career out at that point, but it made me realize, man, like the story that you see is not always the story of the beginning, right? Like we often are looking at people's chapter 12, chapter 13. Chapter 1 looks a lot different in almost all cases. And that to me is what was fascinating about writing a book like Backable, which is, okay, fine, you're clearly backable right now. But if we go back to the beginning, and what are we going to see? And in the vast majority of cases, what we saw is someone who wasn't backable. And so really what this book was all about, and I think kind of threading all these sort of things that you mentioned, Rajiv, is figuring out what happened between chapters 2 and chapter 12.
Well said, sir. We had a lot of folks just tune in. Hey, again, welcome to 99 Pages. We're talking with Suneel Gupta, author of Backable. I know we hit play just a little bit early today. Feel free to ask some of those questions in the panel on the chat. Suneel, I want to talk about failure. It is a strong opening theme in the book. I mean, everyone from Fire Festival and Billy McFarland, you talk about the Challenger explosion, your own personal failings, whether it was in political campaigning and with Groupon, etc. And it's interesting to me, this concept of failure, because we don't talk about it a lot. It seems a little bit taboo, and here you are being so open about it. So what is your advice to people in their building a relationship with failure as they go through entrepreneurship?
You know, I think that I think Bill Gates probably said it best. I mean, there's so many failure quotes out there right now, but I think I like Bill Gates's the best, which is that success is a lousy teacher. I think that's true. I mean, I can tell you now, yeah, I've had a few wins, but I've had many more losses. And if I'm able to objectively sort of look at those side by side and almost, you know, add a metric, add a number next to each one of them on how much learning came from each of those experiences, there's no doubt in my mind that the failure column provided a lot more. And so I think it really depends on sort of your perspective. But I think that, you know, what I see backable people tend to adopt is a mantra that I now try to adopt, which is that long-term success comes from short-term embarrassment. We need to go through these experiences in order to get to where we ultimately want to go, right? And I think that it really is, I've come to see it now as almost the cost of doing business more than anything else. The other way to look at it is that, you know, coming back to Bill Gates's quote about learning, you know, if you see life as a to-do list, failure can hurt, right? Because you want to check off all these things on your list, and failure is sort of holding you back. And that's probably the lens in which I sort of looked at my career for, I think, you know, most of it until I think recent years, where every failure really kind of like, it cut me to the core. But when I was actually sort of going through and writing this book, I really started to shift my mentality from life being a to-do list to life being a to-learn list. How much can I learn, right? So for example, with this book, you know, if I can honestly tell you right now that if on my to-do list was, I want to write a best-selling book, if that was my to-do list item, I don't think I would have gotten this book out there. I really don't, because the energy and the energy that is required to write a book like this really will push against the anxiety that you have when you're writing it, right? And if the goal is I want to write a best-selling book, well, then that means that every page I write, every time I sit down, I've got to feel like I'm killing it, right? I've got to feel like I'm totally in that zone, right? But I'm not always going to be in that zone, and that's life. You know, you sit down. I remember Salman Rushdie was one of my favorite authors, and he was passing through Chicago when I was in law school, and it was in law school that I thought to myself, maybe one day I'd love to take a shot at writing a book. But he was one of my favorite authors, and he was passing through town, and so I begged him to grab 15 minutes with me. Just begged him. I wrote him 4 emails, and finally he was like, "All right, enough. I'll meet you. Just come meet me at this place. I'll be in between meetings." And so I show up there, and one of the first questions that I asked him, I remember he was just like, he gave me this like sort of like, "Come on, man, look." And the question I asked him was, "How do you get inspired to write?" And he kind of like takes a pause, and he sort of makes direct eye contact with me, and he's like, "Look, I don't get inspired to write. I just write. I sit down at my desk just like anybody else every day, and I sit there and I write. And the vast majority of what I write ends up in the trash bin. But every day there tends to be a little pearl, something worth salvaging. And what I do is day by day, I take those pearls and I string them together into sentences, and eventually into paragraphs, and eventually into chapters, and eventually into books. And that's what I do. And I love that because it really kind of comes back to what you're talking about with failure and long-term success coming from short-term embarrassment. I think if you see life as sort of like this to-learn list, where every day it's not about like necessarily killing it, but every day it's about learning. It's just about learning. What can I learn today? I think it opens you up to go after things that you may not have gone after otherwise.
Well said, sir. If you don't mind, I'd love to take a question. We're getting a couple questions in from the chat, from our live viewers. Again, if you're listening, feel free to throw it into the comments. We will get to them. One of my good friends and colleagues, Mr. Adrian Reyes, asks about the concept of race. Does race affect your outlook on any of the pillars that you outline in the book for your readers, or does that actually add like a whole separate item, if you will, a to-do list for an entrepreneur as an underrepresented minority? That's really interesting, actually, because underrepresented minorities are, notably missing from some of the big founders in Silicon Valley. I'd be curious to hear your advice to them.
Yeah, Adrian, it's such a good question because, I really think it's a book in and of itself, and there undeniably, when I was sort of going through all these different sort of systems of backability from all these different walks of life. I studied Oscar-winning filmmakers, celebrity chefs, iconic founders, leaders within companies, civic, activists. And no matter where I looked, bias was such a huge systemic problem. I mean, I just take venture capital, for example. Less than 2% of venture capital funding goes to female founders. Less than 0.0006% of venture capital funding goes to Black women founders. I mean, it's a huge problem, and I wish that I had in this book sort of a systemic answer, like a societal, like this is what we need to be doing, but I don't. I really don't. What I do have, I think, is a playbook for what happens when the person on the other side of the table looks different than you, because I think that happens all the time. And when that happens, there's a huge risk, as we know, that we are on the other side of conscious or even unconscious bias, right? And one of the things that we talk about in the book that I really gravitate to is that there was a coach. Her name is Maureen Taylor, and she works with a lot of female founders. She works with a lot of introverted founders. And one of the things that she told me that I thought was very interesting is that when you walk into a room, you're going to feel like the spotlight is on you. Your job to create a backable moment, whether that be an interview, a pitch, an audition, a true backable moment, is to take that spotlight that's shining on you and to shine it onto something else. Shine it on your message, shine it on your product, shine it on your customer, but you want to shine it on something other than you. And that's important for anyone, but I think it's particularly important when the person on the other side of the table is just coming from a different perspective or a different race or a different gender than you. So I'll give you an example. One of the things I did is I went and I just witnessed people pitching, right? Because I wanted to study these backable people, but I also wanted to see how things work in action. One of the pitches that I sat in on was it was in the New York area, and it was this Brooklyn pizza shop founder, right? He owned and operated a pizza shop, and he had the idea that you should be able to tap a button and get pizza from an independent pizza place. So not a Little Caesars, not a Domino's, but get a pizza delivered to you right away, right? So he created this app, and he really hustled, and he had some friends who helped him sort of pull it together, and he bootstrapped, and he had this app, and he was pitching it to these venture capitalists. Now, the thing was that when I showed up to this meeting just a few minutes early, and this guy, he was just awesome. He's telling me his story. He's sharing with me on his phone photos of his great grandfather who had started a pizzeria back in Italy. So he's like a 4th generation pizza shop owner, full of personality. But then the investors start to walk into the room, and you can just start to tell, right? It's that moment where now all of a sudden he's like, oh, I've got to be different now, right? I can't be pizza shop guy. I need to be, somebody who's about to raise venture capital funding. And so you can tell he gets a little bit more buttoned up, and he starts to, sort of, become this version of him that I actually don't think he was, right? And so he's going through his slide deck, and it's not going very well. It's just not. And all of a sudden, I'm there to witness, but I kind of come up with this idea that, like, gosh, when he was showing me stuff on his phone, he was so alive. So I blurt out, I'm like, hey, would you mind showing us the app? Do you have the app on your phone? And he's like, yeah, actually, I do. And so we all get up and we huddle around him, and he starts showing us this app on his phone. And as he is doing that, he sort of lights up, just like he was when I'd walked into the room before everybody else did. He has this personality, has energy about him. The point is this: we are, I think, more compelling when we're showing something than when we're describing something. I think that is true for everyone, but I think it is particularly true to keep that in mind when the person on the other side of the table is different than you. You want to switch as quickly as possible from presentation mode into huddle mode, where you're looking at something together.
And if I can comment on what I love about how you describe, like, making the story, making your pitch about something else. There's actually a moment in your book where you describe the concept of, like, agency, where you're like, look, people don't like to brag about themselves. They don't like to be their own advocate. But if you actually are advocating on behalf of somebody else, you tend to bring the heat. You bring the passion, right?
Totally, man.
Yeah.
I studied agents as part of this book as well, right? And the Hollywood agents. And I saw people who were just like, when they walked into a room representing their clients, they were like, the Ari Gold personalities, like, that's unacceptable. My client needs more. But then all of a sudden, they're advocating for themselves, and I'm hearing these stories about them going in to ask for a raise, and they're just not, like, the level of conviction is so much lower, and they're just like, so what if, back to your point, Rajiv, what if we could always be in the mindset where we're not representing ourselves? Yeah. And the reality is that we're not. No matter what, even if you work inside a big company, you're working for you. There is a customer. There is somebody. It could be your team. It could be the people you're serving in politics, whatever it is. It's never about you. It's always about somebody else. And so keeping that in mind and almost seeing yourself as an agent for that person, not only do I think that just naturally gives us more energy when we feel like we're representing something that's bigger than just us, but I also think it makes us much more compelling in a room. We're much more likely, I think, to show high conviction. That's particularly true if you're shy and introverted.
Yeah, like, one of my favorite lines in the book that I'm going to take with me for the rest of my career is the idea that it is far easier to prepare for a presentation than a discussion. And I think when we focus on the presentation aspect, the PowerPoints, the bullets, and we're hiding behind this filter of what we think our audience wants to hear, I think it's super compelling what you're describing here, because you're saying, look, I'm trying to tell a story, but I'm trying to engage. You're forcing engagement between you and your prospect, whether it's a customer, an investor, or whatever, a voter, whatever have you, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's not a monologue. Backability is very, very rarely does someone come in, give a presentation, drop the mic, walk out, and, like, they got the thing. Interviews don't work that way. Auditions don't work that way. Pitches don't work that way. It never works that way. It's a series of interactions, right? Which is why practice has become such an important part of being backable. I think we look at people who are gifted speakers, who's gifted inside a room, and we say, wow, that person's a natural. Well, sometimes, but I can tell you the vast majority of the cases, they are the product of lots and lots and lots of practice, deliberate practice. In the book, what I call these exhibition matches. They're doing exhibition matches before they get into a live event. And there's some ground rules for exhibition matches. It's not as simple to say you got to practice. I think there's some ground rules. Number one is that no venue is really too small. So that means you could be practicing these exhibition matches with friends, with family. I do some for my 8-year-old daughter. Just no venue is too small. Play exhibition matches whenever you can. The second is that when you're playing an exhibition match, don't give the director's commentary version. So it's not like, hey, so Rajiv, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go this, and then I'm planning on giving him this, and then that. No, you do the real thing as if that person is the person you're pitching. You're in the live moment. It's it, right? So no director's commentary. And the third that I thought was really, really interesting, I actually really love this one because I do this all the time, is you finish up the pitch, right? And you share what you have, and then you say, what do you think, right? What do you think? And very rarely are we going to get the insight and the feedback we need when we ask someone, what do you think about something? Instead, what we should ask is, what stood out to you? What were the 2 to 3 moments that really stood out to you? Or you can say, hey, could you repeat back to me like the gist of what you heard? Because what will happen is you will really fully understand which moments actually stuck and which didn't. So play lots of exhibition matches.
I love it. You know, it's funny. Last time I had to interview for a job, my wife and I were literally in the same, dwelling on separate Zoom, in different rooms on a Zoom bridge. And she was able to drill me. And she didn't take okay, what are you going to talk about now? I had to give her the actual script. It was, it's, note to self, use your better half to to prepare.
100%.
Absolutely. I want to talk about this. One of the most favorite parts I had in the book was the concept of incubation. This idea, and you reference Bill Gates a lot in this. Can you talk to our entrepreneurs in the audience today about what the incubation period is and the right setting to make the most of that period?
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the things that really surprised me is that when I first started researching this book, I really thought that I was gonna find a certain style of communication for Backable people. They were gonna use eye contact and hand gestures and pacing, all these sort of Dale Carnegie-esque Toastmasters, things that we learned to do. But the reality is that didn't happen, right? I mean, certainly you have Backable people out there that seem to come off as charismatic speakers, but there were plenty that did not. There were plenty that were much more shy, much more introverted, spoke in their own style. And if you want an example of that, look up the most popular TED Talk of all time right now. And if you look it up, what you'll find is a guy named Sir Ken Robinson giving this just amazing talk on education, just brilliant. But it's a very un-TED-like presentation. He's got a hand in his pocket, he's got a slouch, he sort of kind of meanders on and off script. It's not the poster child for charisma. And look, Elon Musk, after unveiling the future of SpaceX, Inc. magazine runs a headline that says, Elon Musk fails public speaking 101. If you go back and watch the original iPhone launch, right, what you're going to find is probably not the charismatic presentation that we might remember from 2007. Steve Jobs kind of wanders around stage, and he uses, if you go to the transcript, he uses the word over 80 times in that speech. The point is that it's not charisma that makes a person convincing, it's conviction. Backable people take time to convince themselves first, and then they let that conviction shine through whatever style it is that feels most natural to them. And the question really is, how do you build that conviction? What do you need to do? And what we talk about in the book, and what I noticed a lot, is that especially inside companies, ideas typically, even great ideas, typically don't get killed inside the conference room as much as they get killed in hallways or around water coolers, pre-COVID times, right? Casual conversations is where most great ideas get killed. Why? Why is that? Well, typically what happens is, and this may sound familiar to Rajiv, I know it sounds familiar to me, which is that you're with friends, you're with colleagues, then all of a sudden inspiration strikes. And you're like, oh my God, I got to share this. And so you share it in that moment. And you look around and no one seems quite as excited. as you are about this idea, right?
Too close to home, man.
Right?
Too close to
It
home.
happens all the time. And now the question is, what happens after that? And what we found is that in the vast majority of the cases, that experience is deflating because new ideas are fragile. And so are we when we are coming up with them. And so what most of us do in that moment is we take the idea, we put it in a drawer, and we walk away. Right? We're like, wow, I guess that wasn't something. But the fact is, it may have been something. It was literally 2 seconds old. You shared that idea was 2 seconds old. And so, I sort of think about, the difference between a chocolate M&M and a peanut M&M. What Backable people tend to do is they almost have this moment in their mind where they're like, what am I about to share? Is that a peanut M&M or is it a chocolate M&M? If it's a chocolate M&M and you squeeze it, it cracks immediately. What Backable people tend to do is they say, I'm gonna resist the temptation to share it right now. I'm not gonna share it. I'm gonna hold back. Even though I've got that almost like I've got to tell somebody feeling, I'm gonna hold back. I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna give it incubation time. I'm gonna go put a peanut inside my idea. Now, what I like to do during incubation time, and people have different practices. We talk about a bunch of them in the book. What I like to do during incubation time is I literally like to just come sit at a desk, pull out a fresh sheet of paper, and just start writing my idea out. And I've got a few sort of ground rules that I picked up from other Backable people. I'll share a couple with you. The first is that we tend to have, when we're coming up with an idea and we're trying to get it down, we tend to sort of want to write and edit at the same time. But don't do that. If you can help it, just write. I mean, I'm talking just get every word that's in your head down on paper. Just write as if like it's just a page count thing. You want to write as many pages as possible. You'll always be able to go back and you'll always be able to edit. That's number one. Number two is something that we talk in the book about steering into objections. Steer into objections. And it was Reid Hoffman who really brought this idea to my attention, which is that we go into a room, we can't just point out the positives. We have to neutralize the negatives. And the way that we neutralize the negatives is that we steer ourselves directly into those objections rather than letting those objections nag at people, right? Because when they're nagging at people, they're not really paying attention to what you have to say until those objections have been addressed. So steering into objections while you're sitting there in this incubation time, your answer doesn't need to be perfect, by the way, and it very rarely will be when it comes to a new idea. But if you've steered into objections and you actually know how to talk about it at least, that will give you such a higher level of conviction to be in a room and to have that back and forth that we were just talking about, right? Again, it's not a monologue. These Backable moments are interactions. They're not monologues. So to be able to say, yeah, that's a good point. And I thought about that. And here's what here are a couple of options to think through. That's very important. The third thing is that when you're in this incubation time, you want to fall in love with your problem, but you don't necessarily want to fall in love with the solution. So there was a reason that you got excited about this idea, and chances are that reason involves some kind of problem, a customer experiencing something, some injustice in the world. So there's something that got you excited enough to sit down. Fall in love with that. Give yourself the liberty and luxury as you're going down these pieces of paper and you're writing this idea out. You might start to flow in a different direction, and that's totally okay. And if you're in love with the problem and not with the solution, you give yourself the flexibility to flow with it.
So I want to ask a question here tied to this, because, on one hand, we have folks that have fallen in love with the problem, and couldn't one put, say, Elizabeth Holmes in this category? You even referenced Billy McFarland in the Fire Festival early book as well. Bernie Madoff. There are absolutely people who have this sense of conviction, that have the recipe that you're talking about, but are frauds. And I'm just curious. I mean, you're an active investor yourself, man. Like, now that you've understood the materials that make up like sincere backability, if that's an adjective, we're gonna make it one on this show. You heard it first. I don't know, backability. Like, how do you sniff out the frauds? How do you sniff out when there's no substance there?
Yeah, man, it's such an important question, and I really I know I said this before about the race question as well. I think this very much also is a book in and of itself, right? I mean, there are so many people I mean, so many situations that we know of, you named a few, where the conviction was not based on substance. It was based on something else. I was having this conversation the other day with a group, and it was over Zoom, as we were talking about this, I'm like, look, there's something else going on here behaviorally. And this woman unmutes herself. She's a psychiatrist. She goes, they're called sociopaths, right? And it's like, yeah. I mean, there are people who are able to convince themselves, right, without the substance, and it's an unfortunate thing, and it does a disservice, I think, in most cases to the world. I think probably in all cases to the world and to the people around them. I also think that they're on the flip side of the coin. You have stories like Bob Ebeling. And Bob Ebeling, if that name doesn't sound familiar, was an engineer on the NASA Space Shuttle Challenger launch. And Ebeling knew that shuttle was going to explode. He knew it. He had all the data. He had everything compiled. He calls a meeting. He gets all of his colleagues in a room, and he's like, look, it's as clear as day. This thing is not fit. It will not be fit tomorrow to go up, because the temperatures are going to drop overnight. It's going to cause these rubber O-rings to stiffen, and it just won't be safe. And he got dismissed. And the Space Shuttle Challenger goes up, and it disintegrates within 90 seconds. And Bob Ebeling spent the rest of his life blaming himself. NPR did an interview with him, and his exact words to them were, God shouldn't have picked me for that role, because I had all the information I needed, but I could not persuade them. And I think that there are so many Bob Ebelings in the world where we have the ideas, we have the data, we have the creativity, but we're not able to persuade people around us. And as it turns out, Rajiv, I do believe this, some of the highest integrity people are also the people who doubt themselves the most, right? Because they're like, look, it's not all figured out. I know that. It's not a complete picture. And so it tends to be that you have really good people with really good ideas that are brimming with self-doubt, and they get dismissed. And I think if this book does anything, my hope is that it gives some of those people the tools that they need, I think, to build the confidence based on real substance in order to bring their ideas into the world.
Absolutely. In fact, that anecdote was the moment at the beginning of your book is actually what hooked me. And this quote, we need more high integrity people who can sell a good idea.
Yeah.
Boom. You had me sold, man. Look, Suneel, I know you got a busy book promotion schedule ahead of you. You got to run off at the top of the hour. And I think I speak for everyone at 99 Pages where I just say, we're just so honored that you came and spent some of your time with us. It's really, really meaningful to us, especially because we love your book so much. I'd love to give you some final words, the last word of the broadcast, sir. You got a crew, our audience is global. Some will be picking up this recording in Europe later on. There's people in Asia watching us right now, in Singapore. As someone who has witnessed a ton of pitches, has been on the up and up and on the down and down, I'd love some just general advice that you would like your readers to take away from your book.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. Look, every morning, I have two daughters. And every morning I sit with them and before they start their school, sometimes it's over Zoom right now during the pandemic. Sometimes, every once in a while I get to drive them to school. But no matter what, I ask them two questions. I ask them, what is the meaning of life? And they say, to find your gift. And I say, okay, well then what is the purpose of life? And they say, to give it away.
Boom.
The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. And Backable, I think if anything, I wrote Backable really about how it is that we give our gift away. How do we take what's inside of us, and how do we share it with the outside world? And what I found along the way, Rajiv, is that there are three words that tend to hold us back. And those three words are, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to step into that leadership role. I'm not ready to run with that idea. I'm not ready to speak my mind. Well, if I could leave like everybody with one message, just one message, it's this. I have now studied hundreds of extraordinary people, and none of them were really ready. I mean, 3 friends from design school were not ready to start Airbnb. A mid-level talent manager wasn't ready to start SoulCycle. A 15-year-old from Stockholm, Sweden, wasn't ready to build an environmental movement, and yet today Greta Thunberg is Time Magazine's youngest person of the year. There were setbacks and there were failures along the way, but I think every single one of them seemed to adopt this mentality that I would love to adopt in my life, which is that the opposite of success is not failure, it's boredom. So let's fight for the ideas that make us come alive, and let's inspire good people to join us along the way, because if no one's told you this, then let me be the one. You are ready.
You are ready. A brilliant ending. Thank you so much again, Suneel, for spending time with us. 99 Pages, thank you for spending time on your Sunday with us. We'll be back next week with author Stephanie Kelton, author of The Deficit Myth. We're going to get into some monetary theory here. Thanks again, 99 Pages. We'll see you next week. All the best.